Welcome to Copilot Podcasts. Here's something that will reframe your whole day. A decorated US Marine, a Christian minister, a 7th degree black belt, and a certified firearms instructor all walk into a book, and they're all the same person. Today, we're breaking down Under Fire, a US Marine stand against democratic socialism and neo-communism by Charles E. Smoot. Specifically, what the book argues about the ideological threats facing America, why Smoot believes Marxist ideology is fundamentally incompatible with biblical Christianity, and what practical guidance he offers to people trying to navigate all of this. By the end of this episode, you'll have a clear picture of what this book is, who it's for, and what makes it different from your average political commentary. I've got someone who's dug deep into this book and its context, so let's get into it. What's the first thing someone needs to understand about what Smoot is actually arguing here?
So the very first thing, and this is important, is that Smoot is not framing this as a standard left versus right political debate. The opening premise of the book is that America is under fire, but not from foreign armies. It's from dangerous ideas. Ideas that he argues threaten faith, freedom, family, and the foundations of the nation.
So it's an ideological battlefield, not a military one.
Exactly. And that framing matters because it shapes everything else in the book. Smoot is drawing on his experience as a United States Marine, a Christian minister, an educator, and what he describes as a lifelong student of history and scripture. So this isn't someone who came to these conclusions from a think tank. He's coming at it from a very specific lived framework.
Right, and that combination of backgrounds is genuinely unusual. Like, most books in this space are written by either a political analyst or a pastor. Smoot is somehow both, plus a whole lot more.
Yeah, and the author bio really drives that home. He has more than 5 decades of experience in leadership, personal defense, and biblical teaching. He's the founder of the Wudokwan Institute of Combat Arts. He's a certified firearms instructor, and he founded something called the Under Fire movement, which is dedicated to equipping ordinary Americans to stand firm in faith, freedom, and personal responsibility during times of cultural and political uncertainty.
Wait, the Under Fire movement? So the book is almost like a manifesto for something larger?
That's a fair way to put it. The book is published Under Fire Media Group, and it's clearly positioned as part of a broader mission rather than just a one-off title. Smoot has other books too, Unleashing the Power of Prayer and Fasting, Fallen from Grace, and other works focused on faith, leadership, preparedness, and personal responsibility. So there's a whole ecosystem here.
That's actually a really interesting point. This isn't just a book. It's almost a movement with a publishing arm. And I have to mention, the book dropped on July 4th, 2026. That is not a coincidence.
Oh, absolutely not. Independence Day as a publication date is a deliberate statement. It's saying this book is about American freedom, and we're planting our flag on the day that freedom is celebrated. That's intentional branding and intentional messaging.
Okay, so let's get into the actual content. The book promises to cover the historical origins of socialism and communism and their devastating impact around the world. What does Smoot's framework look like there?
So the book positions itself as an exposé. Smoot says he's exposing the ideological roots, historical failures, and spiritual dangers of socialism, communism, and modern Marxist thought. The historical origins piece is foundational because he's trying to show that these aren't new ideas that just appeared in modern politics. They have a long track record, and that track record, in his view, is devastating.
And he's connecting that history to what's happening right now in American culture.
Exactly. One of the core arguments the book makes is that socialist and communist ideas have influenced modern culture, education, government, and this is the part that's going to raise some eyebrows, even some churches. He's not just pointing at Washington or Hollywood. He's pointing inward at religious institutions, too.
Okay, that's bold. Most political books in this space will go after the government or the media, but calling out churches? That's a different level of willingness to step on toes.
It really is. And it signals that Smoot isn't writing a book that's going to tell his audience what they want to hear. He's writing a book that's going to challenge them, including people who might consider themselves already on his side.
So let's dig into the theological argument, because that seems to be the real engine of this book. What's the case he's making about Marxism and Christianity being incompatible?
This is where the book gets really specific. Smoot argues that Marxist ideology is fundamentally incompatible with biblical Christianity. And the way he frames it is through this distinction between biblical compassion and government-enforced redistribution.
Okay, break that down for me. What's the difference he's drawing?
So the argument is essentially this. Caring for the poor and the vulnerable is a biblical mandate, but that mandate is directed at individuals and communities, not at the state. When the government takes over that function through forced redistribution, Smoot argues it's not compassion anymore, it's coercion. And coercion, in his framework, is antithetical to the freedom that Christianity requires.
That's a distinction a lot of people on both sides of this debate actually miss. Like, the argument isn't don't help people, it's who does the helping and how.
Right, and that nuance is important. Smoot is very clear that he's not arguing against compassion, he's arguing against a specific mechanism for delivering it. And that's what makes the book more theologically serious than a lot of political commentary that just slaps Bible verses onto a policy position.
And then there's this phrase he uses, faith and freedom rise or fall together. That's basically the thesis of the whole thing, right?
That's the spine of the book, yeah. It's not just a slogan, it's the logical framework. If you accept that premise, then anything that threatens freedom is also a threat to faith, and vice versa. So socialism and communism aren't just bad economic policy in Smoot's view, they're spiritually dangerous because they erode the conditions under which genuine faith can exist.
That's a genuinely interesting argument, because it's not just saying socialism is bad for your wallet, it's saying socialism is bad for your soul.
Exactly. And that's what elevates it beyond a standard policy critique. He's making a claim about the nature of human beings, that we are fundamentally spiritual creatures, and that political systems which ignore or suppress that dimension are not just inefficient, they're dangerous.
Now, I want to push back a little here because there are obviously people who would read this and say, wait, plenty of deeply religious people in other countries support social democratic systems. Scandinavian countries, for example, have strong welfare states and also high rates of religious participation historically. How does Smoot's framework account for that?
That's a fair challenge, and it's one the book doesn't directly address based on what's available in the page content. What Smoot is focused on is the ideological roots of Marxism specifically, not every form of social policy. He's drawing a line between what he calls democratic socialism and neo-communism, and the kind of voluntary community support that he sees as biblically grounded.
So he's making a distinction between the ideology and the policy outcomes.
That seems to be the intent. The book is specifically targeting the ideological framework, the Marxist worldview, rather than any specific tax rate or government program. Whether that distinction holds up under scrutiny is something readers will have to wrestle with themselves.
And that's actually what makes a book like this worth engaging with, even if you disagree with it. It's making a specific argument that you can actually push back on rather than just vibes.
Totally. And the book is described as thought-provoking, which suggests Smoot himself is inviting that kind of engagement. He's not just preaching to the choir, or at least he's trying not to.
Okay, let's talk about the practical side of the book, because this is where it gets really interesting for the audience it's targeting. Who is Smoot writing for, and what does he actually tell them to do?
So the book explicitly names its audience: Christians, parents, pastors, and patriots. And the practical guidance is organized around what he calls spiritual weapons for confronting deception and defending truth. So it's not just a diagnosis of the problem, it's a toolkit.
Spiritual weapons, that's an interesting phrase. What does that mean in practice?
Based on the book's framing, it's about equipping people to think biblically and evaluate ideas through the lens of Scripture. So the weapon isn't a policy position or a political party, it's a way of thinking. Smoot is essentially saying that the antidote to bad ideology is a robust theological framework that can identify and resist it.
Which is actually a pretty sophisticated argument. It's not vote for this person or support this bill. It's here's how to think so you can make those judgments yourself.
Right. And that connects back to his background as an educator. He's not just trying to tell people what to believe, he's trying to teach people how to reason through these questions. The book is described as a call to courage, conviction, and action. And that action starts with thinking.
And the personal responsibility angle is woven through all of this too. It's not just faith and freedom, it's faith, freedom, and personal responsibility as this inseparable trio.
Exactly. And that's where the Marine background becomes really relevant. The military ethos is deeply rooted in personal accountability. You don't wait for someone else to solve the problem, you take ownership. Smoot is applying that same ethos to the cultural and political moment he's describing.
I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, the Under Fire movement and how this book fits into it. Because Smoot describes himself as dedicated to equipping ordinary Americans. That word ordinary is doing a lot of work there.
It really is. He's not writing for academics or policy wonks. He's writing for people who are worried about the direction of the country and want to understand why things feel the way they do and what they can actually do about it. The book is 342 pages, which is substantial, but the framing is very much, this is for you, not for the experts.
And that accessibility is probably why it's ranked in the top 3,000 in the Communism and Socialism books category on Amazon. That's not nothing for a book that just came out.
Yeah, it's ranked number 2,969 in that category, which for a brand new release is a solid indicator that it's finding its audience. And the fact that it's available in both Kindle and paperback formats suggests they're trying to reach as many people as possible.
Okay, I have to bring up the author bio again because I keep coming back to it. This man is a 7th degree black belt, the founder of the Wudokwan Institute of Combat Arts, a certified firearms instructor, a Marine veteran, a minister, and an educator. Like, at what point does someone's resume become a personality?
Right? And what's interesting is that all of those things are actually coherent. They're not random. They all point to someone who has spent his entire life thinking about defense, physical defense, spiritual defense, intellectual defense. The book is almost the natural culmination of that life.
That's a really good way to put it. He's not just writing about standing firm. He's literally built his life around the concept of standing firm in every domain.
And his tagline, faith and freedom rise or fall together, that's not just a book slogan. That's clearly a life philosophy. It shows up in everything he does, from the Martial Arts Institute to the ministry to the writing.
Now, one thing I think is worth acknowledging is that this book is going to land very differently depending on who's reading it. For someone who shares Smoot's theological and political framework, this is probably going to feel like a rallying cry. For someone who doesn't, it might feel like a challenge or even a provocation. And that's not necessarily a bad thing.
That's a really fair point. The book is described as challenging readers to think biblically and evaluate ideas through the lens of Scripture. If you don't share that starting point, you're going to have a very different experience reading it. But that doesn't mean the arguments aren't worth engaging with.
Right. And actually, one of the most interesting things about the book is that it's not just a political argument, it's a theological argument that has political implications. That's a different kind of book, and it requires a different kind of engagement.
Completely. And Smoot is very clear that he's not just trying to win a political argument, he's trying to equip people for what he calls a war of ideas. That phrase, the war of ideas is real, the stakes are high, the time to stand is now, that's the closing call to action of the book's description. It's urgent. It's not academic.
And that urgency is probably what's going to resonate most with the audience he's targeting. People who feel like something is wrong but can't quite articulate what. This book is trying to give them the language and the framework to do that.
That's exactly it. And that's a real service, regardless of where you land politically. Helping people think more clearly about complex ideas is valuable. Whether you agree with Smoot's conclusions or not, the act of engaging seriously with these questions is worthwhile.
Let's talk about the structure of the book for a second, because 342 pages is a commitment. What does the book promise to deliver across that length?
So, based on the book's description, it covers a lot of ground. Historical origins of socialism and communism, the theological incompatibility with Christianity, the cultural influence of these ideas, the distinction between biblical compassion and government redistribution, the link between faith, freedom, and personal responsibility, and then the practical guidance, the spiritual weapons piece. That's a full curriculum, not just a polemic.
So it's structured almost like a course. Here's the history, here's the theology, here's the cultural analysis, here's what you do about it.
Which makes sense given that Smoot is an educator. He's not just making an argument, he's teaching. And that pedagogical instinct probably shapes how the book is organized and how accessible it is to people who aren't already steeped in this material.
And the fact that he's also a lifelong student of history and scripture, that's not just a credential, that's a methodology. He's saying, I'm going to look at this historically and theologically, not just politically.
Right. And that dual lens, history and scripture, is what makes the book's argument more layered than a typical political manifesto. He's not just saying this is bad policy. He's saying this is bad history and bad theology. Those are harder claims to dismiss.
Okay, so let's bring this home. When you step back from everything we've covered, the author, the argument, the audience, the framework, what does this book really represent?
I think it represents a very specific kind of response to a very specific kind of anxiety. There are a lot of Americans, particularly Christians, who are also politically conservative, who feel like the cultural ground is shifting under their feet and they don't have the vocabulary to describe what's happening or the tools to respond to it. Smoot is trying to give them both.
And he's doing it from a position of genuine credibility. He's not a pundit who read some books. He's someone who has spent 50 plus years living out the values he's writing about.
Exactly. And that matters to the audience he's writing for. When Smoot says stand firm, he's not speaking metaphorically. He's speaking from a life that has literally been about standing firm in every sense of the word.
Here's what I keep coming back to, though. The book's description says it's more than a political analysis. And I think that's the key. If you read it as a political book, you might miss what it's actually doing. It's a theological argument that has political implications, not the other way around.
That's a really important distinction. The politics are downstream of the theology for Smoot. He's not starting with, I don't like this policy, and then finding Bible verses to support it. He's starting with a theological framework and then applying it to the political moment. That's a fundamentally different kind of argument.
And whether you share that framework or not, understanding that distinction helps you engage with the book more honestly, either to agree with it or to push back on it in a meaningful way.
Completely. And I think that's the invitation the book is making. It's not saying agree with me. It's saying think about this seriously. The call to courage and conviction is also a call to intellectual engagement.
So here's what this really comes down to. Under Fire is a book that's trying to do something genuinely ambitious. It's not just diagnosing a problem. It's not just making a political argument. It's trying to equip a specific community of people with a complete framework, historical, theological, and practical, for understanding and responding to what Smoot sees as an existential threat to American faith and freedom.
And the author's background is inseparable from that ambition. A Marine who has spent decades thinking about defense, physical, spiritual, intellectual, writing a book about defending ideas. It's coherent in a way that a lot of books in this space aren't.
The war of ideas is real. That's Smoot's closing line in the book's description. And whether you're in his corner or not, that's a premise worth taking seriously. Because ideas do have consequences, and the question of which ideas shape a society is genuinely one of the most important questions of any era.
And that's ultimately why a book like this matters. Not because everyone will agree with it, but because it's making a serious argument about serious stakes. The best response to any argument, whether you agree or disagree, is to engage with it seriously. And Under Fire is asking for exactly that.
We started this episode by saying America is under fire, not from foreign armies, but from dangerous ideas. And whether you think Smoot has identified the right ideas or the right response, that framing itself is worth sitting with, because the battlefield of ideas is real, and knowing what you believe and why you believe it has never been more important.
And that's the lasting value of a book like this. It forces you to clarify your own thinking. Even if you push back on every argument Smoot makes, the act of pushing back requires you to know what you actually believe. That's not nothing. That's actually everything.
Faith and freedom rise or fall together. That's the line Smoot lives by. Whatever your politics, whatever your theology, the question of what you're willing to stand for and why is one that doesn't go away. Thanks for joining us on Copilot Podcasts.
America, we are under fire. Not from foreign enemies, but from within. But how is this happening right before our eyes, in our schools, in our media, inside our churches and government? Neo-Marxist ideology and critical theories are reshaping how we think and live. When truth is rewritten, when faith is weakened, and when power goes unchecked, nations begin to fall. During the Cold War, I served as a United States Marine, but my mission to defend truth and freedom didn't end there, because the greatest threat to America is not on a distant battlefield. It's already entrenched within our institutions, and we are under fire. Understand the battle before it's too late.